Wow, I've got a story for you. Picture this. You inherit 300 acres of woods, a land so beautiful that people living next door just start treating it like it's theirs. They've got trails running through it, benches bolted into the ground, and signs with fancy names like Welcome to Cedar Ridge Nature Preserve. The only thing, the deed my name's on it. Now, when my grandfather Walter Hayes passed away, people didn't expect much drama. He was a simple man living in a ranch house outside Millbrook County. The kind of place where the paint was peeling and the porch swing creaked whether or not someone was sitting in it. Everyone assumed he'd leave behind the house an old pickup truck, maybe a few $1,000 in savings. But tucked away in the paperwork, there was something else. 300 acres of land stretching behind what would later become Silver Run Estates. Back when I was a kid, Silver Run wasn't even there. All that existed was thick oak and hickory trees, deer trails, a creek that flooded every spring. Saturdays, my grandfather would take me there with a thermos of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. He'd just point to the land casually saying, "See that ridge? That's ours. That creek bend ours too." And it didn't sound like bragging. It was just a fact of life, like gravity. As time passed, the county grew. Developers came sniffing around, roads were paved, and eventually Silver Run Estates popped up right on our boundary line. Big houses matching vinyl fences and mailboxes that all looked like they came from the same catalog. A homeowners association with bylaws thicker than a Bible. But here's the kicker: when the developer built Silver Run, he never bothered buying my grandfather's land. He just built right up to our old barbed wire fence and stopped. For years, that fence just sat there, slowly getting swallowed by vines. The people in Silver Run didn't know better. They saw nothing but trees behind their houses, no signs of life. They assumed that empty land was just there for the taking. And I didn't even know how far things had gone until a week after the funeral. I drove out there by myself to check things out. The will had just been filed, so I figured I should walk the property, make sure everything was in order. I parked by the entrance to Silver Run, which was all shiny stone and flags stuck in the landscaping, looking clean and organized. But then, just past the old fence line, I saw a wooden post with a map nailed to it. Red Cedar Ridge Community. Preserve. The sign read with trails, family paths, blue loops, and red ones. All through my woods. And honestly, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was bold. They'd nailed that sign directly into an 80-year-old oak tree. I kept walking, and not 200 yards in, I found a bench, solid cedar, freshly bolted to the ground with a plaque that said donated by the Keller family in loving memory of Max. Max, I assumed, was a dog. It felt like I was intruding on something that wasn't mine, except it was mine. By the time I circled back to my truck, I had counted 3 more benches, 2 birdhouses, and more signs directing hikers around. Nobody asked permission. Nobody knocked on my granddad's door. They had just absorbed it. The next day I checked the deed. No easements, no shared access. Everything was clear. I owned that land. So I wrote a polite letter to the Silver Run HOA. Professional, respectful. I made sure to state I was the legal heir, attached a copy of the deed, and requested the removal of the signs and structures. I thought at worst this was a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with some paperwork. A week later, I got a response from the HOA president, Brent Callahan. He wasn't apologetic. He told me that the community had been using the trails for years, improving them, and that they considered the land part of their shared space. He dropped the term de facto common space, like it was official language, something that would scare off someone who didn't know better. I didn't back down. I called him. "Brent, I just want to be clear. You understand that long-term use doesn't transfer ownership, right?" There was a pause. "Well," he said smoothly, "community reliance does create certain expectations. Expectations aren't deeds," I shot back. Our conversation shifted from misunderstanding to full-on conflict. I realized this wasn't just about a few benches and signs anymore. This was about whether ownership meant anything if you're too polite to defend it. So I got a survey done on the property. And when that crew showed up with their bright orange vests and fancy equipment, I knew things were about to escalate. We spent all day marking the property lines, and by late afternoon it was clear Silver Run's boundaries stopped where my land began. The stakes were in the ground, the lines were drawn. But sure enough, the following weekend people were still hiking past the new markers. It wasn't malicious. It was habitual. And that's when I realized if I did nothing, this would get harder. The longer people think something belongs to them, the more they resent you when you remind them it doesn't. So I installed a solid steel gate, not a cheap chain. A clear sign next to it said, "Private property, no public access without authorization." Within 48 hours, the HOA started calling me. They sent emails, some polite, others not so much. They invited me to an emergency meeting, and I went. The clubhouse smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. There were about 50 people there. Brent called the meeting to order, and when he saw me walk in, his smile tightened. I waited for him to open the floor for discussion. A woman stood up first. "We bought here because of that green space." Another man added, "My kids learned to ride bikes there." When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. "I'm not taking anything away that legally belonged to you. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. There's no shared use agreement." Brent pushed back, "But community reliance creates equitable considerations." I didn't flinch. That's not ownership. And then came the twist. However, I added, "I'm developing a managed recreation program, controlled access, permits, entry fees, liability waivers. It's going to be structured, responsible, and undeniably mine." The room went quiet. Some people were curious, some upset. But it was clear things were shifting. Fast forward a bit. After the permits were approved, Cedar Ridge Outdoor Preserve officially opened in October. I had everything in place: managed trails, parking, educational workshops for schools. And yes, I charged for access. But something changed. People started seeing the improvements. The erosion was fixed. The trails were clearer. The wildlife returned. By the end of the first weekend, almost 100 day passes had been sold, and a surprising number of them were from Silver Run residents. A few months later, Brent showed up again, this time without a blazer, just hiking boots and a fleece jacket. He admitted, "We should have approached this differently." We both agreed ownership doesn't just mean having your name on paper. It's about deciding what kind of steward you'll be when someone challenges it. And now, Cedar Ridge is thriving. The forest is healthier. Wildlife surveys show stronger diversity. But here's the thing, there's still some tension. Some folks believe I was greedy for charging fees. Others think I saved the land from being destroyed. So let me ask you, if you inherited land that an entire neighborhood had been using for years without permission, what would you have done? Would you have let it slide to keep the peace? Or would you have drawn the line, knowing it might make you the villain for a while? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with HOA drama or property disputes, I'd like to hear your story too. Because here's what I've learned. Boundaries don't create conflict, they reveal it. And what you do after that, that's what defines you.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.